forum.
For more on the emerging tensions between legislators and the Federal Reserve Chairman, we turn to Martin Bailey, Senior Fellow of Economic Studies at the Brookings Institution. Bailey was Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors during the Clinton administration. And Republican Congressman Scott Garrett of New Jersey. He sits on the House Banking Committee, where Chairman Bernanke testified yesterday, and joins us from Capitol Hill. And Representative Garrett, you're the author of a letter to President Obama with a long list of bipartisan co-signatories asking the president not to allow the Fed any more powers until it's investigated. What would you want a probe to look at?
Well, that letter was, as you indicate, a bipartisan letter. Republicans and Democrats got together, and the issue, of course, arose not so much out of the Financial Services Committee, but was the Oversight Committee here on the Hill that began to investigate some of the asserted, alleged, let's say, undue pressure that alleged by the Fed vis-a-vis the banking industry and the Merrill Lynch and Bank of America situation. And I'm sure you're familiar with all the investigation that was going on in the House, and we're just suggesting to the White House that before we take this opaque entity, the Federal Reserve, and give them even more authority, shouldn't we just take a brief moment, and shouldn't the administration be interested just to get to the bottom of that inquiry and lay all that out before the public as well? And then we can go on and just have a fuller debate on these other issues as well.
Well, you've called the Fed an opaque entity. During his testimony, did the chairman clear up anything that you had questions about?
Not really, but I do appreciate the chairman always coming to the committee and laying out his positions on this issue, but so many other ones as well, more specific to the matters at hand as far as the administration's proposal of giving them broader and greater authorities than they ever have had before. The whole area of the idea of systemic risk and systemic risk regulators and throwing that onto the Fed as well, additional authorities in that respect. Yeah, he gets into some of it, but as you can imagine, some of us have real concerns about giving this entity even more authority when there are just so many other questions with regard to their actions in the past, whether it's monetary policy and more recently with them approaching into the topic of fiscal policies as well. A lot of us would, instead of saying broadening their authority, that we would say we should be beginning to reining in and refocusing their mission once again.
Martin Bailey, is Congress being too hard on the Federal Reserve Chairman?
Yes, I think they are. I think he's done a magnificent job in managing this crisis. He really was thrown into what has been a horrendous period, and he's kept the economy afloat. He's kept the financial sector afloat, and I think he should get a lot of credit for it. Now, did he make some choices or mistakes along the way? Quite probably he did. Did he put some pressure on people? Quite probably he did. But those are things that you have to do in a very difficult situation that he faced. This notion of auditing monetary policy, I think, is just a terrible idea. I think markets would react negatively to it. I don't see what we gain out of that. I think we probably would see interest rates rise. We already have the ability to question Bernanke. He testifies regularly. So I don't see what positive we would get out of that.
Well, you heard the congressman. Do you think you know everything that you would want to know about the nature of the Bank of America takeover of Merrill Lynch, for instance?
Well, remember what we have in our system is we choose people very carefully. The chairman of the Federal Reserve is chosen by the president, approved by Congress. He has an expert staff, and we delegate to him the authority to run monetary policy together with the other members of the Board of Governors. So I think to go in and try to micromanage what he's doing is a bad idea. If we have a general fighting a war, we give him a chance to fight it, and he has to make tough decisions. He has to make decisions very quickly. Bernanke had to make decisions over the weekend. Now, under the proposed reforms, we are asking that the Secretary of Treasury give approval if the Federal Reserve is going to expend, put out Treasury money, is going to rescue an institution or to put it back on its feet. So I think that's an appropriate thing to do, and I think the Secretary of Treasury, working together with the Federal Reserve, can do this quickly. But I don't think you can necessarily come back to Congress or try to audit what everybody said. That just doesn't work.
The Congressman, does your proposal, and one from Congressman Ron Paul of Texas, threaten the Fed's historic independence from Congress?
No, I don't think so at all. And actually, quite honestly, I'm really surprised by Mr. Bailey's comment. He's so dismissive of the idea that Yeah, I think he said that, yeah, probably the Fed did exert some pressure on Merrill Lynch and with regard to the BOA situation, and he's not taken aback by that. If he believes that went on, he's not surprised, and he is okay with that. I think a lot of American public and a lot of people in the business community would have concerns about that. And I can sit here as well and say, you know, on the one hand, the president does appoint the head of the Fed with the consent of the Senate. Well, you know, 600,000 people in my congressional district, or at least people came out and voted for me. But I don't sit here and say, well, you know, constituents, I'm from the government, just trust me on these things. And I don't think that anyone from any department or any agency can just simply says, I'm appointed, I'm selected, so now I just can be able to run any way I want to. I can run roughshod over Wall Street or big businesses or small businesses without some level of accountability. The American public is simply asking in this bill, and it's a bipartisan bill. The one you referenced when you mentioned Ron Paul, he has a bill that I co-signed on with as well. But that bill has, I think, like 220 members of Congress. Both sides of the aisle are on that. All they're asking for is just a little bit of openness to this otherwise non-transparent entity. There's nothing in his legislation that says that Congress is going to step in and beginning to dictate monetary policy. There's nothing there whatsoever. And I would suggest to you as well that in a lot of areas there's a myth out there with regard to the separateness or the independence of the Fed in some of these areas. If you look, the chairman of the current Financial Services Committee has on over a half a dozen occasions expressed his opinion very strongly on two areas, on the area of monetary policy and setting rates and saying they should be kept down, and we saw that the Fed did keep them down. A lot of economists thought that wrong. And secondly, in the area of consumer protection in the area of credit cards, put a lot of pressure on this Fed particularly, and lo and behold, this Fed all of a sudden sort of abouted course and said, okay, they're going to enact some regulations in this area. So there's somewhat of a myth about how independent this and other Feds have been with regard to Congress. But this idea of just asking for an accountability look at this or an audit doesn't change that.
Martin Bailey, a myth, or are we really in new territory when you hear Congressman Garrett talk about oversight and auditing power over the Fed?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I think Ben Bernanke has a lot of integrity, and I didn't mean to imply that he did anything improper with respect to Bank of America. I don't believe that he did. He has testified about that, and I believe what he said about that incident. Now, there were mistakes that the Fed made in the period leading up to the crisis, and I think there is an open question as to whether the Fed is the right institution to really monitor the big bank holding companies. I'm not sure they probably are. So I don't necessarily disagree with everything the Congressman is saying. I think it's appropriate to look at what are the right powers for the Fed to have and what maybe should go to maybe a consolidated regulatory agency that can work together with the Fed to make sure we don't get into this crisis again. But I think what we're seeing is sort of an attack on the Fed and the independence of its monetary policy. And we've learned from many countries around the world and the experience in the last 20 years or more than 20 years in the United States that an independent Fed that can set monetary policy, can say what kind of inflation it's willing to live with, and how it wants to keep inflation down. That's the best thing for the economy, and it has been proven so in the United States and elsewhere.
Well, we'll have to leave it there for this session. Martin Bailey, Congressman Garrett, gentlemen, thank you both.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Next tonight, another way to reach and to connect. Jeffrey